Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm going to call the October 26th Special City Council meeting to order. And before we move on to tonight's agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. On March 6th, I issued an emergency proclamation declaring a civil emergency in the city due to the COVID-19 outbreak. On March 24th, the governor issued Proclamation 20-28, prohibiting meetings that fall under the Open Public Meetings Act, such as our city council meetings, from being conducted in purpose. The prohibition has been extended through November 9th. Tonight's meeting will be held entirely remotely. The meeting will be recorded, streamed live, and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone to listen live to the meetings or to make comments. So if anyone is on the call who did not sign up to speak tonight but would like to speak, please press *3 on your phone and we will add you to the speakers list. At this point, we'll take a moment to take roll call of the council members in attendance. So please say here when I call your name. Councilmember DeMichelle.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Hall.
Here.
Thank you. Council President Hunt.
Here.
Thanks. Councilmember Marks.
Sorry, here.
Good to hear. Deputy Council President Ray.
Here.
Thank you. And Councilmember Walsh.
Here.
Thank you. So we also have many of our city staff here at the meeting this evening as well. We have City Administrator Bob Kowitz, we have Sustainability Coordinator Megan Curtis Murphy, and we have our Deputy City Clerk, Tisha Gieser. Other city staff may also be in attendance this evening. For those members of the public on the call, welcome. The clerk or I will call on you to make comments when we reach that portion of our agenda. So I'm going to reiterate some general meeting guidelines. For all meeting attendees, please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you're also streaming the live video feed, please turn the sound off as there's a delay. And the next item on the agenda this evening is public comment. And City Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak or indicate a desire to speak this evening?
Yes, we have one person signed up to speak.
That's great. Thank you. I'll go through a few guidelines first. Please direct your city comments to the whole city council and not to individuals. And while this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. When recognized, unmute your microphone, state your name, address, and relationship to the city, speak clearly and pause frequently, and please limit your comments to 5 minutes. Please remute your microphone when done. If you do not respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will be able to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if able. Personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior will not be permitted. I always like to state that citizen comments, both written and verbal, are an important aspect of the public process, and the city takes these comments very seriously. We thank you for taking the time out of your busy evening to address us tonight. City Clerk, can you please identify the first person who has signed up to speak?
Yes, the first speaker is Ann Fletcher. Ann, I'll request you unmute now. You may also need to unmute your own phone. And this is Tisha. You'll need to press *6 on your phone, and then you may also need to unmute your phone itself. Are you there, Ann? Mayor, I see she's unmuted. If we can just give her another minute here.
Sounds good, thanks.
And I see that you're unmuted on our end, so you may just have to unmute your phone and you should be audible to us.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Ann, we can hear you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, this is Ann Fletcher, resident and member of People for Climate Action. I'd like to comment on Agenda Bill 7941. The City Council and the public want a policy-level board to protect the environment. They want to do this without losing the Rivers and Streams Board oversight until new code can be put into place. The proposed ordinance does both, with two exceptions. These are highlighted in the chart that I sent in with my written comments. And I think they can be fairly easily addressed, as I'll briefly explain. Number one, transportation projects that require critical area studies. The neighborhood meeting was added to the Issaquah Municipal Code as a way to replace Rivers and Streams community review of projects that impact critical areas. This works well with the essential exception of transportation projects that impact critical areas. The administration in Appendix G, number 6, recommends that transportation projects, instead of a neighborhood meeting, should include discussion of the environment through already established processes of public input. We'd like to ensure that this happens. I asked the City Council to give input on this to the administration, and for the administration to please consider how environmental information from those public input processes would be shared with an environmental board. The second item is measurable achievement of environmental goals and objectives in its annual report, Environmental Board Duty number 7. The board needs a sufficient mechanism to get targeted information so it can report on measurable progress toward overall city environmental goals. The administration in Appendix G number 8 states that to gather information to evaluate performance of city regulations may require a different process from the checklist. We'd like to ensure that such a process happens in the future and with board participation. The council could incorporate it into the ordinance, board duties. Language for this is suggested in my written comments. Or they could request follow-up from the administration on a process involving the board for environmental data gathering. Either way, this would give the board the mechanism to complete its annual progress report and give effective advice on plans, policies, and regulations. And with these two items addressed, and a continued strong relationship among the council, the administration, and the community, we will have an excellent ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. City Clerk, do we have anyone else signed up this evening to speak?
No one else has signed up. If there's anyone on the line who would like to make comments, please press *3 on your phone now.
Let's give it a little bit of time.
So I hit *3. This is Connie.
Hi, Connie. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, because sometimes it seems to take a while for *3 to get through. So this is Connie Marsh. I live up on Squawk Mountain, as you all know, and Anne did great. So what I want to add to my agreement with Anne is maybe a little bit of backstory in transportation projects. Transportation projects don't go through the regular land use code except for the SEPA section, and the SEPA section is only noticed in the Seattle Times. So it's difficult for the community to know what's going on with transportation projects, especially as it relates to the environment. And so throughout the last few years, the city has put out a variety of neighborhood meetings, and we're never really quite sure what those neighborhood meetings are going to be. And so what this could do if the city council decided that it wanted to express an opinion is it would add an environmental component to any of those neighborhood meetings. So for example, if it was one of those meetings where you walk from board to board to board, there would always be a section on critical area impacts and explaining what those would be so that the community would understand. Now, what's necessary for any board to get an idea of what's happening citywide is to have those impacts also be included in a database. Probably the easiest thing to think about would be counting trees, but somebody would have to decide what they want to measure because you can't measure anything. So this is just an example. If a road was going to take down all of the mature trees along Newport Way, for example, by Tibbetts Valley Park, then that would be counted as tree removal in a database. We removed 18 mature trees, and then you would say, oh, but we planted X number of trees, and then we decided that was sufficient. And the board could then look at that and say, wow, that's sufficient, that was great, can you believe how awesome we are? Or they could say, you know what, that new code is not working very well, and we need to suggest to the city council that it might need to be adjusted. So if you only look at the sort of private development projects, you would be missing a large component in what the city needs to understand for its environmental impacts and improvements. And that is why I'm so insistent on getting the transportation projects included in this analysis. The administration has suggested a checklist, but this checklist is a checklist that is supposed to inform what initial changes are needed for Title 18. And that does not continue through the role of the environmental board. And so that does not serve the function. And I don't want there to be confusion in thinking that that actually serves that purpose. One is sort of a short form, what do we need to do to change Title 18 initially? And then this other checklist or data gathering that we're talking about is over time, how well is the new code working? How well are all of our city regulations working that impact the environment or improving the environment? So I can't quite decide as I review my words whether I have confused you more or helped with the story. Hopefully this is helpful and you can better understand why these changes that Ann eloquently presented are necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. City Clerk, are there any other folks signed up this evening for public comment?
No, there's no one further from the public attending the meeting tonight.
Well, I thank both Connie and Ann for coming in. I know they've both been tracking this issue for a very long time. So the comments we got tonight on the environmental board came with some additional requests clarifying about transportation projects and other items, and the council will be looking at these this evening. So thank you both. As a reminder, anyone who is watching or watches later, you can always send written comments into your city council at citycouncil@issaquahwa.gov. In addition, comments received by email on any of tonight's agenda topics will be acknowledged by our council president. So the next item on the agenda this evening is AB 7941, establishing environmental board and repealing IMC 18.03, regarding the Rivers and Streams Board. The action before council this evening will be to adopt the ordinance, and this item has been before council before at the October 5th council meeting and postponed to for consideration at tonight's meeting. So I'd like to invite Sustainability Coordinator Megan Curtis Murphy for a brief presentation. Welcome, Megan.
Great, thank you. Well, good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm Megan Curtis Murphy with the Office of Sustainability. I'm glad to be back this evening to discuss some updates we've made to the Environmental Board and to ask for council's consideration of the ordinance before you this evening. I'd like to thank several community members, a couple who are on the phone tonight, PPC commissioners and council members for all of their input over the last few months and for working together to make a stronger proposal for our community and for our environment. I'll start this evening with the purpose and a timeline of the process, and then talk about the feedback we've received and the changes to the ordinance as a result of that. Next, I'll review some flowcharts showing how the board's work will be incorporated into decision-making processes, and then share PPC's recommendations on the ordinance this evening. I will also briefly review the additional information requested at the last meeting, and which is summarized in an accompanying table. We will end with next steps in the process for establishing the Environmental Board. The purpose of the presentation this evening is to present the updated proposal and seek council authorization to adopt the ordinance to sunset the River and Streams Board and establish a new Environmental Board. The Environmental Board, as proposed, will address a broader scope of environmental and sustainability issues in the city, including climate change, and will contribute toward the protection of our environment here in Issaquah. Residents in Issaquah are passionate about the environment, so the city decided to start with them when developing the proposal for a community environmental board. In June, we had 2 community meetings and distributed a survey to get ideas on the proposal for the new board. In July, we brought the proposal to City Council for a study session, and then an update in August with changes based on the feedback we received. We held a public hearing on the board at PPC in August and got a lot of feedback both from commissioners and the public at that meeting. Following the PPC public hearing, we met with a couple residents and worked with our community planning and development department to make further changes to the ordinance, incorporating much of the feedback we heard in those meetings. There's an additional PPC meeting in September, and now we're here before the council this evening asking for consideration on this ordinance. This table summarizes the comments that we heard at the August 3rd City Council meeting and August 13th PPC meeting, and the changes to the ordinance as a result of that. A more detailed table was included in the memo for your reference. We'll get into greater detail on these in the coming slides, but I want to point out a few items here. We updated the wording of the objective and several of the duties and responsibilities. We also worked with community planning and development on a new neighborhood meeting process in response to the public's request for community review of projects. And further, we developed a natural environment checklist to be used on projects and to help inform future policy changes. The last item here was from a discussion at the last council meeting about the role of youth on the board. There was a suggestion to include a discussion or training on the value of diverse opinions on all boards. This was a great idea that started with the importance of including youth in the conversation and was broadened to be about the value of hearing from people from all different backgrounds, including different ages, ethnicities, or income levels. We're working with the clerk's department to include this in the board and commission orientation process, so thank you for that. As referenced on the previous slide, the objective has been changed to align with the comments we heard to make it about protecting the environment and taking action on climate. The new language is displayed in red. It also reads more closely to how the River and Streams objective was originally worded. Just as a reminder on the membership, we'll have 9 members and 3 alternates with 2 positions reserved for youth as requested by the community and council. The other membership attributes have not changed in that we're looking for a majority of residents and to have diversity on the board. We're seeking individuals with both professional experience as well as community members interested in the environment. And as the board will be covering a range of topics, We want to see a balance in these topics represented through the backgrounds and interests of individuals on the board. These next few slides will go into the details about the duties and responsibilities with major updates in red. For the first item, the city added additional items to the code that the board will review. Both the Shoreline Management Program and Storm and Surface Water Master Plan are items that River and Streams would have reviewed. Relevant portion of Title 18 was included, and as well as portions of Title 13 and 16 have been added. The board will also have a chance to review the list of city projects through the Capital Improvement Plan and the Transportation Improvement Program. The board will provide input on environmental impact or other sustainability considerations for these projects. The next two have not changed. This board will issue board statements to track their recommendations throughout the approval processes, and these recommendations will be noted to have substantial weight for the decision maker. Next is to review research and best practices to advise on environmental policies and ordinances in the city. And then the last one on this page changed in response to feedback we received. Previously, we proposed that the board would develop and maintain an environmental and sustainability checklist to be used on projects. Given the time it would take for the board to get up and running, we've worked with community planning and development to develop a checklist that was included in the packet. The proposed natural environment checklist would be used on projects with critical areas that are classified as level 2 and up in the permitting process, as projects at this level are larger in scale and could have a greater impact on the environment. A link to the level of review matrix with sample project types was included in the memo for reference. In addition to the natural environment checklist, these same projects will all receive a neighborhood meeting as a form of community review to replace the review that was previously done by the River and Streams Board. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about how the neighborhood meeting and checklist will work.
Excuse me, Megan. This is
Yes.
the mayor. Councilmember Martz, did you want to wait till after the presentation, or did you want us to go back a slide?
I guess if you want to collect questions,
Okay.
I can note the slide.
Great. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Megan.
Okay. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about how the neighborhood meeting and checklist will work as a form of project review. Looking at the flow chart here on the left-hand side, you'll see the split for projects with critical areas and without critical areas, and then a split for projects that are level 2 and above. As you can see in blue in the middle, projects that are level 0 and 1 will still have a city consultant do a peer review of the critical areas study to make sure it details any impacts to the critical areas and mitigation plans in compliance with code. There'd be no community review for these levels of projects, but city staff would use the information from the peer review to help inform their decision making. For projects that are level 2 and up, after the peer review, these projects will have a neighborhood meeting. City staff will fill out the neighborhood meeting handout, which includes details on the critical areas, shorelines, tree retention requirements, and will include the technical area experts in the meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to provide the community an opportunity to understand the proposal and to provide the city with thoughts and concerns before a decision is rendered. Following the neighborhood meeting, city staff will fill out the natural environment checklist, which includes environmental information about the project beyond the critical areas piece. The neighborhood meeting information, including public comments received at the meeting, will be attached to the checklist and travel with the project to help inform decision-making. The information we get from the natural environment checklist, along with the neighborhood meeting handout, will also help identify and inform policy issues in the Issaquah Municipal Code that the board may want to weigh in on during the Title 18 updates. I'm going to go back a slide quickly to look at how this new process relates to the environmental board. As seen in duty number 4, the role of the environmental board will be to advise on the implementation of the checklist and process. As detailed in the ordinance, the board will have a chance to review the checklist after 5 uses and annually thereafter to provide feedback to community planning and development on its use. Continuing on with the rest of the duties, the board will also advise on planning and prioritization of actions related to climate change and resiliency. The city is planning to do a climate action plan next year, so the board will be key in helping to advise on that planning effort. Next is develop recommendations on programs, services, practices, and priorities relating to environmental sustainability and protection. Next, we'll have the annual report, which has also changed as a result of feedback. The board will provide an annual report to the mayor and city council on work plan activities and measurable achievement toward environmental goals and objectives. It'll also include a self-analysis of their work and effectiveness to be presented to city council. This was suggested by a PPC commissioner and will provide an opportunity for discussion if there are any parts of the ordinance that need to be modified or updated in the future. And finally, the mayor can direct the board to perform other duties as may be prescribed in the ordinance. We put together 3 flowcharts showing the flow of work for the board and how their recommendations are factored into the decision-making process. The first is for items requiring council review, such as city plans, policies, and regulations. First, the city administration prepares the items and then presents it to the environmental board. The board provides input and recommendations, which are relayed through the meeting minutes. City staff incorporates it into the work product and then presents it for council review. Council is instructed to give substantial weight to the recommendations of the environmental board, which is something that was incorporated into the board as a response to the community desire for the board to have teeth in the decision-making process. For items that require review by PPC, the process would be similar for the first 2 steps. Next, PPC would review the item and give substantial weight to the board's recommendations. The city would incorporate any feedback and then present to city council. The council would also be instructed to give substantial weight to the recommendations of the environmental board in their decision-making. Lastly, the board will be asked to provide their input on various program developments and environmental practices. These are not items that require review by external decision makers, but the recommendations of the board would be considered and incorporated into the city's work. The proposal before council this evening was presented at the Planning Policy Commission meeting and had a public hearing on September 24th. PPC recommended approval of the ordinance, but issued a letter with 3 concerns for consideration by council. The first is about transparency in decisions about critical areas. As the administration developed a new process for projects with critical areas to have a neighborhood meeting, the administration does not recommend adding an additional process for projects without critical areas. The next was the environmental board should be given flexibility to determine topics it addresses. As proposed, the ordinance provides the mayor the authority to delegate additional duties to the board, and it also includes a self-evaluation process, which the administration believes is sufficient in providing this flexibility. The last concern was wanting to have a 6-month review of the checklist and progress report of the board rather than annually. The administration proposed annually to allow time for these processes to get started, plus the review of the checklist after 5 uses. The administration has not made changes to the ordinance since the September 24th PPC meeting. Along with the PPC comments, there are questions about a variety of other topics. Full responses were included in the agenda packet, and I'll provide a quick overview of the topics here. There are questions about including transportation projects and projects with significant impact to trees in the neighborhood meeting process. There are questions about the overall purpose of the natural environment checklist, which was designed to supplement the neighborhood meeting information and help inform updates to Title 18. There are suggestions to include additional language in the ordinance, adding city council to direct duties to the board, and adding in the term environmental security, which the administration believes is already addressed through climate resilience. And lastly, there was a request for comments from the neighborhood meetings to be shared with the board, and those can be included in agenda packets for the environmental board. There are 2 options before the council this evening. The first is to adopt the ordinance as proposed, and the second is to modify the proposed ordinance. The administration recommends adopting the ordinance as proposed to sunset the River and Streams Board and establish a new environmental board, which will address a broader scope of environmental and sustainability issues in the city. If the ordinance is adopted this evening, we'll begin recruitment next week and interview potential candidates. We anticipate that the mayor's appointments will be brought to City Council for confirmation in December. We would have our first board meeting in January. Once again, the recommendation from the administration is to adopt the ordinance before council this evening as proposed. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Megan. We do have a few questions. Before we go there, though, I'm going to go to Council President Hunt and see if there's any public comments received by Council that need to be summarized.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Council President Hunt, and we did receive a number of email comments on this topic. A lot of them came in, the majority of these came in right before the last time this was on our council agenda, which was October 5th. And we also did receive email comments from the individuals who gave public comments at the beginning of this meeting. So in addition to those comments, we received a letter from a community member who wanted us to strengthen the ordinance and would also like more ability of the board to review and give advice on project applications that do not have critical areas but could have significant impacts on greenhouse gas emissions. We received an email stressing the importance of taking action on climate and wanted to ensure that the board has the power to make a difference. We received an email comment regarding that the environmental board's duties should review the checklist and help develop that with staff, as well as that neighborhood meetings should review projects with critical, transportation projects with critical areas, and that meetings, the neighborhood meetings should have a representative of the environmental board attend those meetings, or there should be a summary that would go back from the neighborhood meeting to the environmental board. And then lastly, we received a email comment which advised us that they recommended we need a better and more inclusive way to engage the environmental board than proposed. Specifically was concerned with the 300-foot that projects would be advertised, or neighborhood meetings would be advertised to those within 300 feet of a project, and felt that that doesn't necessarily fully encompass those that would be impacted by the project. Also was concerns that rivers and streams had some functionality that wasn't covered by the new environmental board, especially regarding quasi-judicial appeal. And then also envisioned a process where the environmental board had ability to have input and influence on city staff, and basically making the city have a higher environmental aim, more environmental considerations than just the minimum that would be possible in code. And then lastly, also this resident spoke to wanting the city to propose better environmental measures and ones that we can influence, not just things that we can track. So for example, with kokanee or salmon, tracking their salmon returns, but also determining what Issaquah can do to positively influence those outcomes. And that concludes the summary of email comments that we received from residents, and we have received many over the many meetings. Thanks.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. We have some questions lined up. Council Member Martz, and Megan, you're probably going to have to share your presentation because I believe Council Member Martz had a question on one of your slides.
Well, I mean, thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember Marks. I can just ask my question sort of thematically. When we were first talking about this, or at least one of the early conversations around it, I asked about mapping out what the Rivers and Streams Board had done and mapping that to what the new environmental board would do. And one of our residents was kind enough to offer their own assessment of that. And so I kind of want to address the two questions out of there. And it sounds like we heard about it as well from members of the community. And the first is this question around transportation projects with critical areas. I did read the response from the administration, but I'm not 100% sure I completely understood it. So I was hoping that maybe we could given that it is a difference from the way Rivers and Streams worked before, and because we've heard about it from the community, whether you could walk us through that one in a little bit more detail.
Sounds good. Thank you. Megan.
Sure, thank you. This is Megan Curtis Murphy. So as we heard, transportation projects are not currently included in the ordinance to be going forward to neighborhood meetings. So as you mentioned in rivers and streams, they were reviewed. The way that we set up the neighborhood meetings is to align with community planning and development in the permit review process. So it includes those projects that get those permit levels. From talking with the Public Works Engineering Department, they are interested in talking about the environment more in the public input processes that they have established. So for most larger transportation projects, they do have some sort of public input process, usually an open house. Several kind of more recent ones have had them, including Newport Way, and the 43rd Signal and Providence Point. So they are planning to include a review with projects that have critical area studies, to include that as a conversation at those meetings. And there's an overall preference to have that be kind of the comprehensive look at a transportation project, rather than having multiple meetings on the same project and different topics, but a preference to combine that into that one format for the open house and to review it there.
Councilmember Martz?
So open house, so a level 2+ project with transportation projects with critical area. The review, the public review, or the non-council review would be that open house? Is that the net sum of the public engagement?
Correct. Yeah. So that's where the majority of the public engagement on that project occurs. I'm not sure if all the topics that they talk about at those meetings, but the environment would be included as a new additional one, and recognizing that it has not been discussed at those meetings before, but would be included going forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. The other question that I had was around annual report evaluating measurable progress towards overall environmental goals.
Yes. So this was included. I think it was added by the councilor, or a community member who wanted to see more kind of metrics included with the annual reporting, which I think is a great idea. Something that we're working on kind of citywide right now is the performance metric process. So through that, we are establishing several metrics associated with environmental stewardship. They anticipate would be included in that reporting process. We'd be able to provide some more background, maybe storytelling a little bit in that, the more board-specific version of that. I would also want to talk with the board to make sure those are the metrics that they see as being important and being included. Historically, we've had some other sustainability metrics that we've included. So if there is a desire to be looking at something else, then I think we could consider that through the board process and include that in the annual report as well.
Thank you very much. That answers my questions.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. Councilmember Goodman?
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. Thank you, Megan, for all the work that you have done on this the whole time. I think you guys have really generally done a really excellent job of putting this new board together and getting feedback from the public and involving the public and PPC, and also thanks to Andrea for acknowledging to PPC at their last meeting that she wishes that it hadn't been pushed through the way that it was. So I appreciate that acknowledgement. I wanted to follow up on Councilmember Martz's questions. Number one, on the transportation projects, I like everything I'm hearing. I have two follow-up questions. One is, how can we get assurance that the information that was gathered at the open house regarding critical areas goes back to the environmental board? And that's really one question. First of all, is it going to go back to the environmental board? And if it's not in the ordinance or in the code, how do we get some kind of commitment, or maybe we should add it? But that's really my question on the transportation projects.
Thank you,
Sure.
Councilmember Goodman.
This is Megan Curtis Murphy. We have been talking with both Community Planning and Development and Public Works about how to get that information back to the boards at both the neighborhood meetings. So I'm including all the projects for the neighborhood meetings as well, because there's also a desire to get that information back to the board. So for the neighborhood meetings, as well as the open houses on transportation projects, they take notes during the meetings and take summary notes of all the comments that they receive. So we would plan to put that into the agenda packets for the future environmental board meetings. So at the next environmental board following the meeting, perhaps the one after, depending on timing, we would be able to get those comments back to them.
Okay. And then my second question is about the measures. And I think I heard you say that you plan on including the board in coming up with those measures. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, I think it would be a mix of the performance metrics that is going through council process now, but then if there was additional metrics outside of that the board thought would be important, then we would have that conversation before putting together that first annual report, if additional metrics are needed.
Okay. And then my third question is about, I think it's number 8. It's about, I call it the catch-all provision and additional direction from the mayor. And I had asked about including city council, and the answer was no, it's not recommended, I think for 2 reasons. One, the city council can always change the ordinance and therefore change maybe the duties of the environmental board, but also because leaving the language the way it is in line with other boards and commissions. And so my question is, do you know which boards and commissions it's in line with? Because I went through and I think it's actually the opposite. That city council is usually included, not the other way around.
When I was reviewing, the ones that stick out in my mind is this is Megan Curtis Murphy, sorry. The Economic Development Board or Economic Vitality Board, Transportation Advisory Board. The other ones are slipping my mind, perhaps Human Services, but I don't fully remember off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. I'll just have comments later.
Yeah, Councilmember Goodman, I'm going to have City Administrator Bob Quitz would also like to provide some commentary on that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Certainly, the administration has no problem amending that section of the code so it's mayor and city council. Again, as Megan has said, as Councilmember Goodman has said, it varies by group, but there's certainly no objection. I've also conferred with the city attorney on this evening, and this small change would not require this to go back to planning policy. So if a maker of a motion would like to make that amendment, certainly that would be fine by the administration.
Thank you, City Administrator.
Yep, thank you. No more questions.
Looking for some additional questions, and I'll give folks a chance. Oh, sorry. No, I know Council President Hunt has questions. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. On the checklist, we've had a number of questions about the use of the checklist from community members. And in the responses in Exhibit G of our packet, it speaks about that the checklist will really be used to for the Title 18 update. And I guess my question is, why not use that data, compile it into a database, store it, and then use it, track over time? Because, and part of my reason for asking the question is because we expect the Title 18 update to be done within the next year and a half or so. And then after that, this data will continue to be, I think, really useful.
This is Megan Curtis Murphy. Yeah, so I think overall, the neighborhood meeting handout and the checklist really go together. They have a lot of that important information about the critical areas, plus tree retention, and then other environmental factors. So first and foremost, I think that neighborhood meeting is meant to help inform attendees of the neighborhood meeting who are going to be coming about the conditions of critical areas and help inform those conversations. Then that with the checklist will then help provide information both to update code, but I think it also does provide a lot of that information about what is going well with the code, where areas of improvement could be. So even once Title 18 is updated, I think it will help evaluate how that's gone, be able to compare what the difference is from before and afterhand. I think there's also that process to review the checklist annually after once after 5 uses and then annually thereafter. So if it's not serving its entire purpose, if after Title 18 is updated and that information doesn't seem like that's as pertinent at the time, then the board could advise on additional measures or additional implementation for it. So I think we have recognized that we want kind of that check back on it to make sure it is being useful for that process.
So would we store that data over time, more than just over the course of the 1 year in which it would be reviewed annually?
We would always have that data. As far as entering it into a system or not, we haven't planned to do that as of now. The process for when that would be filled out now is around the neighborhood meeting. It's possible that through Development Commission or other projects, there might be changes made along the way. So that would be another thing to go back and make updates in the system to change. So it's right now it is that kind of more standalone process around the neighborhood meeting to have that.
I think as well, Council President Hunt was asking that question. This is the mayor. I think collecting the data to start is great, but I think we have to get back to you on what kind of tool would be used to track it and analyze it and compare. I don't think we've gone that far or figured out a tool or any sort of cost associated with that. So we will capture the data and we'll have to have a future conversation. I am looking in the chat box to see if there are any other council members this evening who would like to ask a question before the council considers a motion. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt again. I had a question on procedure. This board will have members and then it will also have alternate members. And I see that the alternate members, it says, will serve in the capacity of the regular members in their absence. And with a number of other boards, we also have alternates as well as regular members. And so I wondered if we could clarify as far as the voting is concerned with the alternates. And why I ask is because we want to have a lot of community voices in these discussions. And my understanding is that the alternates will vote if there are absent members, and that vote will be recorded and not just to meet a quorum. And so I'd like clarification, and that might be a question for the clerks.
This is Megan. I might ask for some support from the clerks.
Sure. Hi, this is Tisha. So we absolutely, and we have worked with the Planning Policy Commissioner, working with commissions across the city to try and standardize their bylaws and rules of procedure. And so as we're working with Megan with the Environmental Board, we'll be recommending some language that absolutely clarifies that we want the maximum number of voting members participating in the meetings and voting.
Thank you for the question, Council President Hunt. It has been like a mayor's initiative to create a cleaner set of expectations for all boards and commissions, and each board or commission so far was set up for a purpose many, many years ago. It's really important to me that we have as many voices as the city clerk had said, but even if there's an alternate at the meeting and the voting chairs are full, we still want their voices. That's part of the discussion. So they are encouraged to participate in the discussion, even if they don't have a voting seat at the time, very similar to the Sound Cities Association model. So we're working our way towards that. Thank you for bringing that up. That's important. We have a question from Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. This is a question for this board that will have youth members, but for all other boards too. One of the members of PPC asked a question about making sure that the youth boards vote, youth members count, or the legality or something. And the question was answered and accepted as an answer, but I didn't really understand the answer. And if I think we have Jim Haney who's here, or maybe the city administrator could answer. And I think it was an interesting question, or at least as I interpreted it, and that is, if you have youth who are not of legal voting age, how does their vote count? And I think I know the answer, but I think it's also a really interesting question, and I wondered if somebody could address how it is we could have under 18-year-old members of our boards and commissions, and then have their votes count on those boards and commissions.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. City Administrator Bobkowitz, I see you turned your camera on. Did you want to provide some info before we go to our attorney, Mr. Haney?
No, let's let the attorney answer the question.
Okay. Mr. Haney.
Good evening. I think the idea of underage or youth members being able to vote on a board and commission is up to the city council. The voting that you're talking about, voting age at 18, that's for purposes of casting a vote in an election. I think you can empower youth members to vote whether they're 18 years of age or not. That would be up to the council.
Councilmember Goodman, does that answer your question?
It does, thanks. And I also think it, my mind went to it, maybe it also had something to do with these are advisory votes usually. And so I think that's also one of the reasons that's what I thought anyway. But thank you. I just thought it was an interesting question. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. I'm looking and not seeing any additional questions. If somebody could indicate in the chat box who would like to consider making a motion. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I move to adopt ordinance number 2923. Thank you, Mayor. Repealing sections 18.03.400-.430 of the Issaquah Municipal Code related to the River and Streams Board, dissolving the River and Streams Board, amending sections 18.10.410, 18.19B.270, and 18.19C.270 of the Issaquah Municipal Code to remove references to the River and Streams Board and establishing an environmental board in Chapter 18.03 Administration.
Councilmember Goodman?
Second.
So it's been moved and seconded. Let's go to council discussion. Please indicate in the chat if you would like to make some comments or if you have any additional questions. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. I wanted to start off by thanking the River and Streams Board for all of their service. One of the actions that we're taking within this motion would be to formally dissolve the River and Streams Board, and they served the city in this capacity as a volunteer commission for many years and provided a very valuable service. And so I wanted to firstly recognize them for that. And I think we've built on the work that they've done and introduced things of concern to the community now, such as the climate action, and built on the work that they did. I am in support of this motion. I think it's been a long time coming, and I think that I do commend the staff for taking all of the comments that we've received and really making a lot of positive changes to the ordinance and strengthening it. We heard a lot about the need for it to have teeth in the beginning, and I do think it does have teeth, and I do think it will provide really valuable recommendations, which will be taken very seriously, given very serious weight by the city elected officials going forward. One thing that I wanted to mention is I didn't see a lot of discussion around disturbance of sites or invasive species. I think for the checklist going forward, that might be one area where we should document that. It's a growing concern. We do hear about that from the community from time to time about development projects disturbing the environment and this leading to invasive species. And I think that would be good to track in a more rigorous way with the checklist. I also would like to see the data, generally speaking, from the checklist being tracked, which is why I asked that question. I think it will be valuable to compile that into a database and to keep that data over time so that we can see our progress. And it will be valuable much beyond Title 18, which will be done, that Title 18 revision will be done in about a year and a half, and we'll continue to need environmental protections and improvements to our environmental stewardship for much more than that. So I would like to see that data compiled and tracked in a rigorous way, and I think it will help us. I think it will also probably help us as we try to switch to a more performance metric-based way of evaluating the services that we provide and how we're doing it as a city and meeting our city strategic goals. So I think overall, I think it's a strong ordinance. I appreciate the changes that have been made, and I really appreciate all of the community input, all of the community enthusiasm that has gotten us to where we are. Thanks.
Thank you, Council President Hunt. Councilmember Walsh up next.
Do we want to go to Councilmember Goodman as the second?
Councilmember Goodman, do you want to go next?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, I was going to make an amendment to the motion. So it's up to Councilmember Welsh whether she wants to comment now on the main motion or comment after I make the amendment and we make that decision.
I'll comment now. Mine's pretty short. Not to get off track into another area of this, but I just wanted to particularly commend Megan Curtis Murphy on the presentation and how the feedback has so thoroughly been tracked through this process. You've had a lot of feedback from the administration, from council, from the community members, from PPC, and I have really very much appreciated seeing that information continue both in your memo to us and in presentations. And I would really hope that that methodology continues, particularly for the environmental board, where there is supposed to be a weight on their advice and their feedback, but also for any of our other boards, because it creates transparency. And I think that's something that we're all looking for. It also makes all of the community members feel heard, which is essential on something where they are volunteering their precious time. And quite honestly, they're more experts at things than we necessarily are. So we want to hear it. So thank you for demonstrating that. I'll save other comments for later.
Thank you, Councilmember Walsh. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman here. I would like to make a motion to amend the ordinance, or to amend the main motion. I hope I say this right, such that it would amend the section of duties and responsibilities under number 8 to add at the end, or city council.
Okay, let me, is there a second? Could somebody, okay, Council President Hunt?
This is Council President Hunt, I second.
Okay. So I think if I captured it correct, and the city clerk will let me know, the motion on the table that's been moved and seconded is to amend the main motion to edit the section of duties and responsibilities under Section 8 and to add the words at the end, and or council. City clerk?
Yes, that aligns with what I heard, except I did hear or city council rather than and or.
Oh, is it just or city council? Thank you. All right, discussion on the motion, the amendment.
Councilmember Goodman here, just very briefly. As I mentioned earlier, the couple of reasons that were given about initially not to amend that were that, one, the council can amend anytime. And while that's true, in reality, that doesn't happen very often. So I kind of reject that as a decent reason. And the second reason was because it is more, it's consistent with language regarding our other boards and commissions. And I think it's actually the opposite, as I said before. So the Human Services is advisory directly to the City Council, as well as Cable TV Commission, Arts Commission, Development Commission, Planning Policy, and 3 or 4 of those also have the exact same language in the catch-all provision of duties and responsibilities that I've proposed as an amendment, which is to add City Council. And I think it's a fair and good addition to make it so that it's not always in the hands. If it falls slightly outside the duties and responsibilities that are expressly stated in the ordinance, there is at least a catch-all provision that allows the mayor under the current ordinance to direct the environmental board to do something else, but there's not the ability of the City Council. And so I think that's it's a good checks and balances for a government to also allow the legislators, which would be us, an opportunity to have that board do something a little different if the community was asking us to, so we didn't have to necessarily rely on a mayor, whoever that mayor might be in the future. So that would be my reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Council President Hunt.
Thank you. I don't have too much to say other than I think that reasoning is sound, and I'll be in support of the amendment.
That's great. Thank you, Council President Hunt. I'm looking at the chat box to see if there is any other comments or questions before we go to the vote, and I wonder if the City Clerk could put the amendment into the chat box. Thank you very much. It has been moved and seconded to amend the ordinance to amend the section on duties and responsibilities under number 8 to add or City Council. And I will go to the City Clerk for a roll call vote.
Starting with Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
Councilmember Hall.
Aye.
Council President Hunt.
Aye.
Councilmember Martz.
Aye.
Deputy Council President Ray.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh.
Aye.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes, 0 nays.
Thank you. So the amendment passes unanimously. I'll give a second or two to see if anybody would like to make a comment before the vote on the main motion. Let's go to Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember Martz. I just want to thank the administration and everyone in the community that's been involved in the creation of this. For people who don't realize, this is a conversation that's been occurring for quite some time. And this is one of those, hopefully measured twice and more than twice and get it right. I know that there's been a lot of folks that wanted to see improvements in environmental stewardship in the community. And I really appreciate the deliberate pace through which this new body has been put together, and will be eager to see its productivity and impact, assuming we vote yes this evening, as I intend to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. Last call, looking in the chat to see if anyone else would like to make a comment, and I'm just going to scroll up to the original motion. Oh, Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you. This is Councilmember DiMichele. I will add thanks that have already been extended to Megan and to the many, many people that participated. I want to especially call out Ann Fletcher and Connie Marsh, who have just stuck with us through thick and thin, and the people for climate action, and the momentum, the sustaining momentum. A lot of times we have an initiative that gets started and then it peters out. And this time there have been people that stayed with us from very beginning to the very end, and I'm very appreciative of that. I too will be supporting this, and I am really looking forward to getting this going and underway, and I'm expecting that we will have great things from this new board. So thank you to everybody that was involved in getting it done. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Councilmember Hall?
Thank you, Mayor Pauly. This is Councilmember Zach Hall. Just real briefly, I haven't heard anything that I disagree with, but I thought I'd get on camera for a minute and say that I support this ordinance too. I actually can't remember which one of you it was, but when I first joined council, I asked one of you a question: how do I know when to vote yes on something, when something is good policy? And one of you says, one of you told me, you know it when you see it. And with this one, I just is good policy to me. So I'll be voting in favor tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I am going to wait a couple seconds to see if there's any other comments. Thank you all. Going back up, the motion that has been moved and seconded is to adopt, don't have my script, that would help. Ordinance number 2923, repealing section 18.03.400 through .430 of the Issaquah Municipal Code related to the Rivers and Streams Board, dissolving the Rivers and Streams Board, amending section 18.10.410, 18.19B.270, and 18.19C.270 of the Issaquah Municipal Code to remove references to the Rivers and Streams Board, and establishing an environmental board in Chapter 18.03 Administration. I will go to the City Clerk for a roll call vote.
Beginning with Councilmember Hall.
Aye.
Council President Hunt.
Aye.
Councilmember Martz.
Aye.
Deputy Council President Ray.
Aye.
Councilmember Walsh.
Aye.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Aye.
Councilmember Goodman.
Aye.
That's 7 ayes, 0 nays.
Thank you. That passes unanimously. Before we close out for the evening, I just want to acknowledge, and that's pretty good, you guys, 8:07, that's awesome. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of items. One is that this was all done during COVID, so nobody brought that up. I can't think of a more difficult time to try and engage the community in a conversation about something as huge as a new environmental board. So the fact that that was done and done well, Megan Curtis Murphy and all your helpers, thank you very much. That is a real point of pride for me. I have been interested in getting this established, and I'm so happy we did it in 2020 with all the other hurdles that 2020 threw at us. And the second thing is I appreciate very much Council President's comments on thanking the Rivers and Stream Boards. And there are some things I get to do in the mayor's office that may not be apparent, but I'm absolutely will be writing a letter to those on the board to thank them for their years of service and to let them know about the new board, because people are giving up their family time at night to come for free and participate in a conversation with all of us and with the rest of the community. That's invaluable. So thank you for bringing that up, Council President Hunt. I appreciate it very much. There being no further business this evening, because this is a special meeting, this meeting is adjourned at 8:08 p.m. Have a good night.